Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're waiting on Assemblywoman Backus, who's going to be down ASAP, and if we need to, we'll go into recess if anything comes up. So we'll call the meeting to order. Madam Secretary, can you call the roll?
Senator Don Darrow-Loop.
Here.
Senator Hansen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Backus. Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Chair Daley.
Here. So mark Assemblywoman Backus present when she gets here. Some housekeeping items before we begin. I'd like to take a moment to go over some basic issues. Please make sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking for those of you on Zoom. Please keep your video on so we know you're there and still with us. Witnesses who wish to provide the subcommittee with additional information or have their complete testimony or handouts included in the permanent record should provide paper or electronic copy to the secretary. We are encouraging anyone listening online or here present to, if they want to make public comment, to do it in the first period of public comment, because after our work session is over, I don't know how much work comment there'll be after work session. When testifying, please remember to begin by turning on your microphone, clearly stating your name and the entity you represent. Spell your name if it's not a common spelling. And there are 4 ways to give public comment, all of which are on the agenda, in person, over the phone lines, in writing, or email. With that, we will get started and we will have our first period of public comment. We'll limit the comments to 2 minutes, and we'll start down in Grant Sawyer. Anyone wishing to give public comment? I see one person coming up. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Sunset Committee. My name is Gil Lopez. I'm here with the Charter School Association of Nevada, here in support of the Public Charter School Authority. We have built a very great system of achievement, accountability, and I definitely showcase our system here whenever I'm on a national stage or with other association leaders from other states. So once again, we're here in support of the Charter School Authority and the great work that they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional comments from Southern Nevada? Seeing none. Anyone here in Carson City? Seeing none. With that broadcast, we'll go to the phones. Is there anyone wishing to give public comment on the phone lines?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will close public comment. We will have one more at the end. So the only thing on our agenda today is the work session. We're going to take them one by one. Our policy analyst is going to give us a little rundown on the work session, and then we'll move on to make the motions as we go on. So with that, Mr. Guinan, if you're ready to go.
Sure, I am. Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guinan for the record. You all have your work session document in front of you. It's also online and people can follow along. As the Chair mentioned, we're just going to go through each item under item B, starting, and then they're numbered, so we're just going to go through them starting at number 1 all the way down. The first item is the Advisory Committee on the Rights of Survivors of Sexual Assault. And what's in this work session document, there's quite a bit of summary of just what the body is, and I think everybody's familiar with that, so I'm going to go through some of it more quickly, and I'm going to skip down to the second paragraph here. This committee reviewed, or the subcommittee, excuse me, reviewed the advisory committee at its meeting on March 27th of 2024. Testimony at the hearing from Teresa Benitez Thompson, who's the Chief of Staff of the Office of the Attorney General, indicated that the Attorney General and other members of the Advisory Committee agree that the bulk of its mandated work has been completed and recommended termination pending further review for possible recommendations for statutory revisions. That review was done in the Attorney General's office and in a follow-up email Chief of Staff Benitez Thompson confirmed that the Attorney General supports a recommendation to terminate the advisory committee without additional statutory modifications, as those, if needed, will be addressed in legislation sponsored by the Attorney General's office. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. And committee, as you may recall, I believe this was set up to help alleviate the backlog on the rape kits and various things, and there was some funding for that. All of the work the committee's been done, and as we said from Chief of Staff Benitez Thompson, that this work is still being done in other areas of the Attorney General's office, and I believe some of the functions are going to be transferred to other bodies through a bill through the Attorney General's office. So with that, I'd be happy to take a motion to make the recommendation to the Legislative Commission from this committee to terminate the Advisory Committee on Rights of Survivors of Sexual Assault.
Thank you, Chair. And before I make that motion, I did just want to note that I had the honor of being the primary sponsor of the underlying bill in the 2019 session, and agree that the board did really, really great work, but it's served its purpose and we are ready to move on. So with your permission, Chair, I would make the motion that you stated.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Guiney?
Thanks, Chair. Again, for the record, Patrick Guinan. We're on number 2 now, which is the Technological Crime Advisory Board. This is another board housed within the Attorney General's office. I'm just going to skip down to where the testimony on the board begins. On March 27th, again, this subcommittee heard testimony from Chief of Staff Benitez Thompson, and she noted that the advisory board has not met since June 22nd of 2020. She explained that it has been exceedingly difficult to meet quorum requirements since that time, and additionally, as technological crime has evolved and become more specialized, it has required equivalent evolution and specialization in law enforcement practices. Chief Benitez Thompson gave several examples where this work is ongoing without the involvement of the advisory board, and for these reasons, the general sense shared by the members of the board is that it has served its purpose and should be terminated. She also noted that the Attorney General is prepared to sponsor through his office any legislation necessary to ensure that statutory provisions related to technological crime remain intact and are located in appropriate chapters of NRS.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And again, on this one, similar review. My understanding, what was told from the Attorney General's Chief of Staff, is many of these functions are being done, just not through this committee. It's in other areas, and that the ever-changing landscape of the technical crimes and this committee doesn't suit that well. So these things are being covered. There's robust oversight of this. And they can be more flexible working just through the AG's office with the other existing bodies. And they are planning on bringing some legislation in this regard as well. So with that, I'd be happy to take a motion to recommend to the Legislative Commission that the commission to, wrong one, that the Technological Crime Advisory Board be terminated.
Thank you, Chair, and want to note as well that I've served on this committee since I think 2019, and we had, I believe, one meeting, and every other meeting I was on, we were not able to get quorum. So I agree that well-intended in 1999 probably, but I think today's technology is a little bit different, and so happy to make that motion that you stated, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a second? That you wanted to terminate this stuff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions regarding the Technology Crime Advisory Board? Seeing no questions, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion is unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guinan. For the record again, we're on number 3 now. This is the Commission to Review the Compensation of Constitutional Officers, Legislators, Supreme Court Justices, Judges of the Court of Appeals, District Judges, and elected county officers. There's some background information in that first paragraph that I won't go over. I will just go to the second paragraph. This subcommittee reviewed the commission during the 2015-2016 interim and recommended that it be terminated. However, that provision was amended out of Assembly Bill 126 in 2017. The Sunset Subcommittee reviewed the compensation again at its May 22nd, 2024 meeting this year. And we solicited input from stakeholders on whether the commission should be continued or terminated. And that solicitation returned some mixed results. We reached out to all the constitutional officers, the leadership of both houses of the legislature, the administrative office of the courts, and NACO, the Nevada Association of Counties. And as I mentioned, Chair, the mix was some folks would like to see the commission continued. Others were happy with it being terminated. If you'd like to have specifics, I'll give you that, but otherwise, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan, and I do have some comments on this one before we move forward with potential motion. 30 years this commission has been going, hasn't met in 20 plus of those years. They submitted, right after they were formed, a very detailed and I think useful report of which no action was taken. It's my understanding, talking with our policy analysts, that over the years there's been a dozen or so commissions to evaluate these various things. None of them have ever worked. Legislature's never taken any action. They have trouble pulling the trigger, as you heard in 2017, getting rid of this. Legislation is going to be introduced to handle everything except for the legislature. We're not touching that one. But my view, the history shows me, you can't dispute the facts that these commissions have not worked. We just need to have a bill and pass some legislation, address these issues, and move forward. So the recommendation, or the motion I'm asking for, is to terminate the Compensation Committee. I'm not going to read all that other stuff.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to make that motion. I'm supportive of that motion. I just wanted to note a couple of things as well. I looked back at 2017, and my recollection was in 2017 there was a constitutional amendment that was being proffered that would take at least the compensation of the legislature out of the legislature's hands and put it into a constitutionally created commission. I don't believe that passed in 2017. I think it passed in 2015, but I suspect the reason that AB 126 in 2017 was amended in this fashion was because of sort of confusion about what was going to happen there. But I agree with you, Chair, that when we're talking about compensation of other officials, elected officials and so forth, the legislature certainly can do that through legislation. And I just don't think there's ever a scenario where the legislature is going to vote to increase its own compensation, no matter what any report or commission tells us. That's something I believe has to be taken out of the legislature's hand to be put just somewhere else where the legislature is not put in that position. So with that, and with the fact that this commission hasn't met since 1995, I think it is time to sunset it. So I will make the motion as stated, Chair.
I will second that, Chair.
Okay, we have a motion, a motion and a second. Anything on the questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And I am going to be sponsoring a bill to address some of these issues, of which there are many. Mr. Guinan.
Thanks, Chair. Excuse me, Patrick Guinan for the record again. We're now on number 4, the Council to establish academic standards for public schools. I'm going to skip the first paragraph and go to the second. This subcommittee reviewed the council on May 22nd of this year, and Cindy Chang, the Director of the Office of Teaching and Learning at the Department of Education, indicated during testimony that the council has not met since 2021 and has only one member whose term is currently active. Director Chang also noted that her office currently performs all the duties that are assigned to the council, including having a timeline and a framework in place for review of standards and communication of any proposed changes to the State Board of Education for approval and adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And I believe some of the testimony we heard on this one was that they're actually a hindrance to actually getting this work done because they're still statutorily required to go back and get approval to start and approval to adopt. So those are the things that are holding it up. I know Senator Dondero Loop asked some of those questions. So with that committee, I would accept a motion to terminate the academic standards for public schools, the Council for Academic Standards for Public Schools. Mr. Yeager.
So moved, Chair.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
One opposed or everybody's aye?
Aye.
Okay, everybody's aye. Motion is unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Guinan, number 5.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guinan for the record. Number 5 is the perfluoral alkyl and polyfluoral alkyl substances working group. I'm not going to read through this entire paragraph, Chair. I would just note that the PFAS group, as it's known, completed its work and created the PFAS action plan, which was published in 2022. And as they stated, as the representative stated in response to question 28 on our review form, quote, no statutory changes are expected regarding the operations of the working group except for the sunset of the working group upon fulfilling statutory obligations. Since the project concluded in June of 2022, the working group has not found any cause to reconvene. That is from Jennifer Carr, who's the administrator of the Division of Environmental Protection with DCNR. And she also confirmed during testimony that her agency does, quote, have the authorities we need to continue to address PFAS and various environmental media going forward under various federal acts that we are obligated to implement, as well as under existing state law. Thus, no additional statutory revision or other modifications are necessary beyond terminating the group.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And just for the committee's knowledge, I did reach out to some of the firefighter groups who were affected by some of this. They agree that the work as originally put in, I believe it was Assemblyman Watts, is done. Federal guidelines are being implemented or already in existence that the state has to follow anyway, so all of the issues are covered. So with that, I will accept a motion to terminate. I'm not going to try to say those words, the working group.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to try to say them either. I think PFAS is the easiest way to say that one, but I would move to terminate as you stated in your proposed motion.
Second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions from the committee? Seeing none? Everybody in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Guinan?
For the record, Patrick Guinan again. We're on number 6 now. This is the Advisory Board on Automotive Affairs. This committee reviewed the board at its March 27th meeting, and testimony from J.D. Decker, who is the chief/administrator of the Compliance Enforcement Division with the DMV, indicated that in the 6 years that he's been administering the board's meetings, it has been difficult to find persons to serve on the board, and that consequently it's frequently difficult for the board to meet. Additionally, Chief Decker noted that currently the DMV has regular and frequent interaction with representatives of the various industry groups it regulates, which is more efficient than relying on biannual meetings of the board for input and feedback on regulatory issues, especially since these meetings are frequently canceled. For these reasons, the DMV, through Mr. Decker, have indicated its support for terminating the board without any statutory or other modifications.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. No real comments on this one. I think it's self-explanatory. We'll accept a motion to terminate the Advisory Board on Automotive Affairs.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, Patrick Guinan for the record again. We are now on number 7. This is the Nevada High-Speed Rail Authority, which was created in 2015 to facilitate the identification of a franchisee to build a high-speed rail line between Southern Nevada and Southern California. This subcommittee reviewed the authority on May 22nd, and there was no representative of the authority available for testimony. However, information provided on the review form submitted by the chair of the authority, George Smith, indicated that a franchisee was chosen in November 2015, and the authority has not met since July 18th of 2017. Currently, the authority receives biannual updates from Brightline West, who are the franchisee, regarding progress toward completion of the high-speed rail line, but the authority has no oversight role regarding current or future developments.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And again, on this one, did reach out to several people in Southern Nevada that had interest in this when it was going. Brightline has been selected. They have that in the statute for the High-Speed Rail Authority. They did have potential authority to issue bonds, and then they would have had ongoing oversight over that. That did not happen. No bonds have issued. They have no duties or oversights at this point. No bonds are anticipated. There's federal and other private financing for this, and they're under construction. Good news. So with that, we will take a motion to terminate the High-Speed Rail Authority.
So moved.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. I don't know who is first. Our minute taker can put down whichever they'd like. Anyway, we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to number 8, Mr. Gannon.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guinan for the record. Number 8 is the Advisory Committee on Medicaid Innovation. This subcommittee reviewed the Advisory Committee on March 27th, and in her testimony on the Advisory Committee, Melinda Southard is Deputy Administrator with the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy, explained that the duties assigned to the committee have been carried out for several years by 2 different entities within the Department of Health and Human Services, the Medical Care Advisory Committee and the Patient Protection Commission. As such, DHHS supports a recommendation from the subcommittee to terminate the Advisory Committee. Ms. Southard also noted that DHHS would review the relevant statutory provisions and work with LCB staff to ensure that any necessary revisions or modifications would be addressed in legislation should the recommendation be approved. You'll see attachment A to this document, which is a subsequent memo submitted from DHCFP, which is titled an enhanced recommendation. So the committee has the choice of simply terminating the advisory committee or terminating the advisory committee and moving its statutory responsibilities under other entities within DHHS as the subcommittee chooses. And I can defer to legal for further explanation as they've reviewed the memo and they have more specifics if the committee would like to discuss them.
Sure, if legal has any need, or you're good? Okay, I think it sounds like it's self-explanatory. On this one, committee, I think we want to recommend to terminate, but the duties and functions, which are being done by other people now, should be transferred over to the other appropriate entity. So our recommendation would be to terminate this committee and transfer their duties is our recommendation, Legislative Commission, as outlined in the memos. Go ahead, Mr. Yeager.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to terminate the committee. Let's see, which one are we on? The Advisory Committee on Medical Innovation, and to transfer the duties to other departments within ask for a legislation to transfer the duties to other departments in Department of Health and Human Services. Anything on the questions? Seeing none, everyone in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Number 9, Mr. Gannon.
Number 9 is the Advisory Council on Graduate Medical Education. The legislature created the Advisory Council in 2023 via Senate Bill 350. Its role is to evaluate applications and make recommendations to the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology concerning the awarding of competitive grants offered by the Graduate Medical Education Grant Program. The ACGME is also to make recommendations to OSIT, the governor, and the legislature regarding the creation and retention of appropriate programs for residency training and postdoctoral fellowships, as well as for the recruitment and retention of physicians necessary to meet the healthcare needs of residents across the state. The Sunset Subcommittee reviewed the ACGME at its April 23rd meeting, and at the time of the meeting, testimony indicated that the full membership of the Advisory Council has not yet been named. And OSIT was conducting a search for a full-time staff person to oversee the operation of the grant program. And I would just note that the members of this subcommittee expressed the desire for ACGME to become fully operational as quickly as possible, but there were no statutory revisions or other modifications discussed at that hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Gannon. And I know we had some discussion on this. I believe there's going to be some legislation brought by another legislator to try to address some of the ongoing issues. OSIT and everybody else wants this to continue. Really hasn't gotten off the ground yet to have anything. So the recommendation is to continue with the Advisory Council in Graduation Medical Education with no changes. We'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Patrick Guinan, for the record again, we're at number 10. This is the Task Force on Safe Sidewalk Vending, which was just created in the 2023 session in SB 92. This committee reviewed the task force on March 27th, and testimony given by Maggie Salas Crespo, Deputy Secretary for Southern Nevada in the Secretary of State's office, indicated that the task force has been conducting its work as expeditiously as possible, given that many of the entities it is working with were not required by SB 92 to adopt ordinances until either later this year or in some cases not until 2025. Ms. Salas Crespo noted that the bulk of the task force's work will take place between July 1 and September 1 of this year, at which time its report and recommendations to the legislature will be due. As the report will include any recommendations for legislation pertaining to sidewalk vending, no requests for statutory revisions or other modifications were made at that hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And I know I spoke to the sponsor of this bill. He indicated that he's probably going to have some follow-up legislation on other types of vending than just food vending, and that Senator Donati is most likely going to put a sunset on it anyway. So at this point, seeing as how we haven't even received their first report, all indications are things are working as anticipated. So recommendation to the Legislative Commission from this committee should be to continue the task force on safe sidewalk vending.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Patrick Guinan, for the record, we're at number 11 now. This is the Certified Court Reporters Board of Nevada. This committee previously reviewed the board in 2018 and voted to urge the board to seek statutory revisions regarding the regulation of videographers through its own bill draft request. When the subcommittee reviewed the board this interim on February 27th, testimony indicated that the regulation of videographers remains a primary concern of the board, as to date the legislature has not approved a bill establishing a regulatory framework for videographers. There was no other discussion at the hearing of this subcommittee on other statutory or other modifications requested by the board.
And Thank you, Mr. Guinan. I was the one that asked the Court Reporters Board to come in based off of a regulation they had and some issues. And then the videographer information came up, and we looked at the bill. There was a bill last session, but it didn't move. They're looking for a bill sponsor. I told them I would help them with that, so I'm planning on doing that to address both of those issues. So our recommendation, I believe, today should be to continue the Court Reporters Board, and we'll work on some legislation this coming session.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to continue the Court Reporters Board with no changes. Anything on the Questions Committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Number 12.
Patrick Guinan for the record. Number 12 is the State Public Charter School Authority. The first paragraph here is an explanation of what the authority and its duties, so I'll skip to the second. This subcommittee reviewed the SPCSA at its April 23rd meeting, where Melissa McAdin, the executive director of the SPCSA, returned to testified and then returned to answer follow-up questions from the subcommittee at our May 22nd meeting. Among other subjects that the subcommittee sought additional information on were in the areas of attendance policy, school ranking formulas, the public employee retirement system contributions, and the payment of prevailing wage for work done on charter school facilities. In her testimony at these hearings, Ms. McAdin did not indicate that the SPCSA had any requests for statutory or other modifications to be recommended by the subcommittee. And I should note also that written responses to the second set of questions that this subcommittee sent to the SPCSA came in to us earlier this week, and staff is in the process of reviewing those submissions for any material that needs to be redacted or removed before we can post that information, but that information will be posted online as a subsequent submission to our May 22nd meeting, and that should be up within the next early next week at the latest. So with that, Chair, I'll turn it over. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan. And on the Charter School Authority, we did have them come in, and I believe Mr. Hanson used the word that we were doing an anal examination on them. Not exactly, but we were trying to get the answers to several questions and concerns that we had, not the least of which was the prevailing wage issues, the attendance issues, the equity, which needs to run both ways issues, enrollment concerns, and so on. So there were several areas of concern I know that I had and others on the committee as well. For today, we're going to recommend continuation of the Charter School Authority, State Public Charter School Authority, but in the final report that we give to the Legislative Commission that I will be presenting, I'm assuming, will include these areas of concern of which the Legislative Commission can propose or not propose to address some or all of them as they seem fit after they see our report. So the motion would be to continue the State Public Charter School Authority in that additional comments, explanation, and areas of concern will be presented in our final report to the Legislative Commission.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Anything on the Questions Committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, real quick.
Go ahead.
Everything I've seen, including all the reports, the idea that we have to recommend potential changes, I do object to that portion of this. I'm also serving on the Legislative Commission, so I'll get a second bite at the apple. But I think they they passed all of our questions with flying colors. They did get, pardon my poor choice of language and saying the type of exam that we gave them, but literally no other agency in the state got the kind of questions that they got. So I want to make it clear that I'm going to vote yes on this, but I don't think we need to send anything to the Legislative Commission as far as needed changes. fact, what we should be sending is words of praise for the excellent job they're doing now that they've jumped up to 60,000 Nevada kids in charter schools. I mean, parents are flocking to these. So anyway, I will support the motion with that explanation. Thank you, Chair.
Understood, Senator Hansen. Any other questions, comments? Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Chair. I'll vote yes for it. I have concerns with it also, particularly that some of the comments that will be pushed forward with it, I'd like to see before I could actually make a final decision. But I will trust Senator Hansen that, as he said, he'll get a second bite at it. I won't. I don't sit on that commission. But I will support it. But I do have concerns because I think the commissions or the charter schools have done outstanding work. We voted against, actually, in the last session on equating them in pay and some of their other benefits to the other public schools. So they're being treated differently, and to me, they're not being treated appropriately. So I'll give yes, but with great concern. Thank you, Chair.
Understood. And just clarification, there is going to be no recommendations necessarily to the Legislative Commission in the additional report. Areas of concern, things that were brought up that there are still questions to, and the Legislative Commission can decide what, if any, legislation they'd like, or which areas of concern they'd like to address, or potentially get more information. I know we have 3 people on this committee, that 4, counting today of Mr. Yeager, but he's not normally on here. 3 people that are on the Legislative Commission, 4 that are here today. So yes, this will be a chance for all of us to talk about this a little bit more. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Number 13.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guyon for the record. Number 13 is the Commission on Post-Secondary Education. I'll skip down to the second paragraph. This subcommittee reviewed the commission on April 23rd. In her testimony to the subcommittee, Kelly Wiest, the commission administrator with Dieter, noted that the commission had one request for a statutory revision with which this subcommittee could assist. The commission is required to conduct a background check for many faculty who instruct in occupational subjects for which the instructor has already undergone the same background check in order to receive an occupational license. Thus, the commission's background check is redundant, and as such, Administrator Wiest requested that the subcommittee recommend amending subsection 6 of NRS 394.465 to exempt an applicant who currently holds a professional or occupational license in this state for which a background investigation was required from the additional requirement to submit to a background investigation pursuant to that statute. And that was the only change discussed by this subcommittee, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Guyon. And as I recall, and you're correct, everyone should be happy, including the governor, trying to eliminate, duplication, right? So I think that that's good work. So if they already have to do a background check, this board doesn't have to do it again. Makes good sense. So I'll accept a motion to continue this board with that modification as a recommendation to the Legislative Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Senator Hansen was first on that one, so we have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Guyon, number 14.
Thanks, Chair. We're at number 14 now. As you mentioned, this is the State 4-H Camp Advisory Council. The council was created in 1965 and has been in existence and has had some subsequent changes made to it by statute, but it has been functioning for quite some time. The subcommittee reviewed the council at its February 27th meeting. Testimony on that date given by Kenny Hawk-Damon, the 4-H Camp Education Program Coordinator with the University of Nevada, Reno, indicated that the council recommends some technical changes to Chapter 550 of NRS that primarily reflect organizational and titular changes within the oversight body for the 4-H Camp Council. And those suggested changes are described in Attachment B to this document. And then I would also note that there is an Attachment C to the document that we just put in this morning or late yesterday, which describes some changes that I believe the chair can go over.
Thank you, Mr. Guinan, and that's correct. They had some technical changes that they recommended, so that will be part of our motion today, I'm hoping. And then I know there was a concern expressed by the presenter that they had concerns over the lease, exchange, or possible sale of the 4-H facility up at Lake Tahoe. It's a valuable piece of property right next to Edgewood Golf Course. So over that concern and that expression of wanting to do that. So we're going to keep the current process where there has to be a finding that it no longer meets the use of the statute. The advisory board would have to agree, the governor, and then that would be in the form of a recommendation, if I read the recommendation correctly, a recommendation to the Legislative Commission, and then the Legislative Commission, if they adopted, would propose legislation. So I think we've hit on the right balance to avoid constitutional issues over separation of powers, and I believe that's correct on my statements. Excellent. First checking with legal counsel. So if we can get a motion to continue the 4-H Advisory Council, the State 4-H Camp Advisory Council, with the technical corrections and the new language on lease, exchange, or sale of the camp.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Senator Dondero Loop. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, everybody in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Guinan?
Thanks, Chair. We're at item 15 now. Patrick Guinan for the record. This is the Rangeland Resources Commission. I won't go through the functions of the commission. They're listed here in the paragraph. I would just say that the subcommittee reviewed the commission on April 23rd, and Chairman Hank Vogler suggested in testimony that revising the terms of the commissioners in statute to be staggered would be helpful in maintaining commission membership. He noted that currently 9 of the of the 9 statutory members, 5 members of the terms are expired. 5 members' terms are expired, excuse me, and 2 are vacant. And otherwise, there were no recommendations for the subcommittee to consider.
And thank you, Mr. Guinan. I know just a little history. Some of you heard this. This bill was originally sponsored by Senator Rhodes many years ago. I did reach out to Senator Gokachia, and he said, you know, it's industry sponsored. The people that are on it, you know, want to continue and, you know, do the work that they're doing. Doesn't cost the state anything. So I was kind of torn on this one. I says, I don't want to take it away from them if they're happy doing it. And no one's complaining. We didn't hear any pushback from any of the people that are subject to this, no one in the industry. So I would accept a motion to continue the Rangeland Resources Commission with their recommendation to establish staggered terms if that will help them with their work.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions committee? Seeing none, everyone in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We have our last work session item. Mr. Guinan?
Thanks, Chair. Patrick Guyer for the record. This is item C, which is labeled additional issues for consideration from the 2021-2022 interim. These are provisions that were included in Senate Bill 210, and we went over this at our first meeting. Senate Bill 210 was vetoed by the governor, and essentially there were 4 parts to it. The governor mentioned in his veto message, which is on our website if anybody would like to review it, attached to that meeting. But the governor noted some concerns with one element of that bill that primarily had to do with separation of powers issue. The other 3 elements of that bill are listed here, and the governor did not mention them in the veto message. So these 3 items are brought back for the subcommittee's consideration. If the subcommittee so chooses, it can pick 1, 2, 3, or none of them to revisit with the Legislative Commission as recommendations for a BDR. Did you want me to go through them, Chair, or are you good?
I think on this one, yes, go
Okay.
ahead and read through them. I think that all 3 have merit, but for the sake of potential discussion from the committee, I think it'd be best if you read them.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Patrick Garner for the record. So the first bullet point notes that the subcommittee voted to recommend legislation amending Chapter 232A of NRS to require Nevada's boards, commissions, and similar entities to submit to the governor a list of persons qualified for membership within 60 days after a position appointed by the governor on a board, commission, or other entity becomes vacant. The goal there being to provide the governor with a more timely replacement options for boards and commissions so that they won't have vacant positions for as long as they do sometimes now. The second bullet point is that the subcommittee voted to recommend legislation amending NRS 232B.210 to require the chair of the Legislative Commission to appoint the chair and vice chair of this subcommittee, each representing a different house of the legislature. The idea there was that it's essentially a time-saving maneuver so that when this committee meets for the first time in the interim, it will already have its chair and vice chair, and so there will be sort of a less downtime getting to the work of the subcommittee. The third bullet point is that the subcommittee voted to recommend legislation to remove the requirement for certain professional or occupational licensing boards and regulatory bodies to submit a quarterly report to the legislature concerning petitions for the review of the criminal history of potential applicants for an occupational or professional license. That coincides with this subcommittee's duties, which to review those same provisions and decide whether they're appropriate or not. And so this would remove those quarterly reports and instead require the subcommittee to review not less than 3 professional or occupational licensing boards and regulatory bodies regarding restrictions on criminal histories of applicants each legislative interim. As the statute is currently written, there is no minimum or maximum number of those boards that this committee is supposed to review. It's just supposed to review them, and so it's a little open-ended. So I believe the subcommittee last interim felt like it would be better to put some better, clearer provisions in place, and also to eliminate the duplicative reporting that's being done.
And thank you, Mr. Guinan. As you guys know, this interim, we didn't get to any of the review of those criminal history boards and various things. There's far fewer that have that are even up for review. There's been question on whether we should even keep that as something that this committee would even need to continue to look at. But I would defer to what the rest of the committee wants. I do think the first one on trying to give the governor, whoever it is, as much notice as they can with people that are potentially otherwise qualified. Governor has no obligation to take those recommendations, but at least it would be helpful. And then selecting the chair and vice chair by the Legislative Commission, I see no harm in that. And then whatever you guys think on the option on the third bullet would be to adopt what the last recommendation was, or part of it to get rid of the duplicate or the quarterly reports. Whether or not we continue to review that issue on the criminal history, there's been no issues. The ones that have been reviewed, virtually no one's doing it wrong. We would always have the ability to review it as that board anyway. and ask them those questions if we wanted to. So with that committee, we would take a motion on any of those that you think are appropriate. Or we can do them separate if you'd like. No?
Thank you, Chair. I had a quick question on the very first recommendation about the notifying the governor. I just wondered, maybe this isn't appropriate, but I will say, since I became speaker, there's just a lot of appointments that you have to make that often you don't even know about them, and I think this issue also pertains to the Senate Majority Leader, and I just wondered, we don't have to do it today, but I didn't know if Chapter 232A was specific to governor appointments, or if that was broad enough to encapsulate appointments made by legislative leadership as well, because it would be tremendously helpful to get a list or recommended names when those appointments become open. Sometimes we get those and sometimes we don't, and sometimes those appointments are very specific, where there seems to be one or two people in the entire state that would fill the category of the appointment. So I guess that's just more of a question. I'm in favor of the first one for sure, and granted that this would have to go through legislation, that might be a question that we can figure out during the legislative session, but I think that would be helpful. So, I mean, I'm in favor of the first one, in favor of the second recommendation. And the third one, it seems to me like we should just eliminate the requirement to provide the quarterly reports, or to even require the subcommittee to do that review, since they can do the review anyway as part of the licensing board. So, Chair, I know I just said a whole lot. I don't know. I'm happy to make those motions, but obviously would defer to other committee members if they have different thoughts on which direction we should take.
We'll hear from legal counsel first.
This is Jessie Demmer with the LCB Legal Division. So specifically with Chapter 232A, that is appointments by the governor to public bodies. So and it's within the title dealing with the state executive branch. I don't think there's necessarily anything that would prevent the committee from perhaps recommending a similar provision for the legislative branch.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think maybe we just go with what's here, and then we'll see as things develop during the legislative session. We could always include that by amendment, because I'm speaking for myself. I think the Senate Majority Leader would appreciate that as well, but I certainly would want to check with her before making that recommendation.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and just take them separately as motions, if you want to make the first one there. Any other, well, we'll have comments after the motion is made.
So thank you, Chair. So I would make a motion for the first bullet point that we, I guess, re-recommend the legislation relating to amending Chapter 232A with respect to boards, commissions, and having the governor receive names of qualified people within 60 days of a vacancy.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Committee, any questions or comments on the motion? Assemblyman O'Neill.
Just for clarification, Chair, or legal maybe, these are recommendations that leadership is made for committees, or is this actually the governor's appointments? Just, so I understand it's just the governor's appointments, then we're going to tell him who he has to get a list. You know, we're a part-time legislature. 60 days with all other things, and also some of our legislators have regular jobs. I see some conflict here and difficulties in meeting this if the way it is currently being recommended.
If I can take a stab at it, and maybe legal can correct me. My understanding of the recommendation is the legislature is not going to do anything. It's the boards and commissions that have these vacancies would then submit. So they have to do it when there's a vacancy, 60 days after that vacancy. I hope 60 days before the vacancy, with a recommendation either for reappointment or here's another person. So then they have to do some of the vetting. Is there somebody out there, and not just leave it all to the governor? Governor would be under no obligation to take the recommendation from that board or commission or whoever the government appointment is for. same as if it was in the legislative venue. But the legislature's not doing the recommendation. The board and commission is.
And we're not vetting or reviewing it. It's strictly between the boards and the governor.
The boards who have the vacancy have to make the recommendation to the governor, so he has at least options.
That I can be much more accepting of.
Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Second bullet point, Mr. Yeager?
Thank you, Chair. I would move. Thank you, Chair. I would move that this subcommittee vote to re-recommend legislation to amend NRS 232B 210 to require the chair of the Legislative Commission to appoint the chair and vice chair of the subcommittee, each representing a different house of the legislature.
Second?
Chair, I have a question on that.
Well, you'll get to it in a second. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Hanson, you're up. Senator
Thanks, Chair.
Hanson.
What is the current process? How did you get appointed?
My understanding is the current process is at our first meeting, the body appoints or elects a chair and a vice chair. Generally, I don't recall if you have to switch houses, but generally that's the tradition's been that's been followed either way. So now this would be a chair of the Legislative Commission, which also alternates houses, would appoint the chair and vice chair.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. O'Neill?
Chair, not so much a question, it's just a comment, a recommendation. I like that it alternate between, that we put that in there as a recommendation, that it alternates between the two houses. Possibly whoever is chair of the commission, it alternate to the other house. Does that make sense?
Yes, well, if I can, the chair of the Legislative Commission already alternates. It's in statute and alternates now. This recommendation would require whoever the chair is, whichever party and whichever house, would appoint the chair and the vice chair. And I believe this recommendation says that the chair and vice chair have to alternate houses.
Correct, but the chair of the commission, let me use the examples, is a Senate. And that their appointment would be to that the chair of this committee would then come from the lower house. The assembly, the people's house, yes. That's what I was looking at, and alternating.
Well, I think if this passes, whoever the chair is in whichever house and whichever party, right, whatever alternate or time they're on, they would look back and say, if the last time it was a senator was the chair, as it is this time, the next time it would have to be from the assembly, and then back and forth. So it wouldn't matter if they were off on that. So next legislative commission, the assembly is going to have the chair. And if this passes, then if they follow tradition, they would appoint someone from the assembly because it's alternating from what it is this time. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just worried about if they follow tradition, that isn't a requirement, and that was just my concern, but I'm not going to beat this to death. I can live.
It would be a requirement for both the Legislative Commission that's already there and for the chair of this committee to alternate. I don't know what else you would want. So, any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Yeager, you had a motion on the last bullet point, and I think I agree with it.
Thank you, Chair. I think the best way to describe the motion is we should recommend that these professional or occupational licensing boards and regulatory bodies no longer have to submit quarterly reports to the legislature concerning petitions for the review of criminal history, and that we also, I believe, should amend, I don't know what the motion is, but we should not require this subcommittee to review. Obviously, they wouldn't review the reports because the reports aren't going to be submitted, but they're not going to, also would not be required to do a regular review on this issue. But if they wanted to review that topic while one of those boards was in front of them, they'd be able to do that. So I think the motion is kind of like to undo that whole process, which seems burdensome and doesn't really work well with the commission. I don't know if that's an appropriate motion for staff or for legal, but hopefully that makes sense.
So let me try to take a stab at restating it. So we want to adopt the portion of this bullet point recommendation regarding the quarterly reports, which was also adopted and put forward by the last Sunset Subcommittee to the Legislative Commission. So we want to keep the part regarding the reports. In regard to the portion that said, hey, you're going to have to review at least 3 of the people over the criminal history reports, we would instead eliminate that and just eliminate the entire provision, whether we look at 3 or none, as one of the duties of the Sunset Subcommittee, knowing they can bring it up at any time they want and ask those questions as part of their duties without it being specified.
Chair, that sounds like a great way to restate the motion, so I would move as stated.
We have a second?
And I will second. I will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Anything on the questions? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I think that brings us to the end of our work session. So we'll close agenda item number 3 on the work session, and we will move to agenda item 4, public comment. Anybody in Grant Sawyer? Seeing no one come up, we don't have anyone here in Carson City. Broadcasting, do we have anybody on the phones for public comment?
Chair, the public line is still open and working, but there are no callers.
Thank you. So with that, we will close the second period of public comment. Members, are there any comments before we adjourn? All right, so that concludes today's meeting. I think that concludes the interim duties for the Sunset Subcommittee. We will have a report that I will likely be making to the Legislative Commission as soon as we get on the agenda sometime later this summer, I'm hoping. So with that, thank you, everybody, for your work on the committee.
Chair, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Mr. Senator Hansen.
I just want to thank you. You ran a very good committee. We bumped heads on the charter school things, but you gave me plenty of opportunity to speak, and I think it was a very well-run committee, and I appreciate that very much. Did a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. And then I do want to thank our 2 alternates today, Senator Don Daraloop, who sat in with 2 meetings today to cover for Senator Lang, and Speaker Yeager, who sat in for our vice chair today and did admirable work yourself. So thank you for the help. And I would also like to thank our staff, legal counsel, Patrick, our secretary, because I'm not doing this all by myself. I get to make final decisions on stuff, but a lot of work goes on behind the scenes, so I want to thank everybody for that as well. So with that, the 2024 interim committee, or Sunset Subcommittee, is adjourned.